a graph that shows that. On the left-hand axis is the inches of water in a foot of soil. So they somehow like squeeze a foot of soil, and that's the amount of water that comes out in a glass. And on the bottom axis is your different soil textures. And the upper curve is the field capacity. So that is what field capacity is a kind of a technical term. That means when you have a rain event and the soil is saturated, and then gravitational flow drains that soil, now your soil is at field capacity. And that's where you have water left trapped in micro and macro pores, and you have air starting to get in. That's a really good environment for plant roots and for microorganisms. That's called field capacity. The bottom curve, the wilting point, that is the point at which water is no longer accessible to a plant root. So the plants can't get any more water out of that soil, so they start to wilt. And so the difference between the field capacity line and the wilting point is the available water. That's the amount of water that's actually available to plants. And so you'll notice that on the right-hand axis, clay soils, they have more water at field capacity and more water at the wilting point stored in them. But that lens, this lens available water, is actually pretty narrow. So there's not as much available water as, say, a silt loam. A silt loam, you had the difference between field capacity and wilting point. That's where that lens, that difference is the greatest. And then sand is also a lower available water. So this is important. So soil texture can determine available water capacity, but you can manipulate that with organic matter and with good soil health practices. All right, soils have structure, and that's the arrangement of soil particles into small clumps called PEDs. And soil structure and texture affect how the soil will hold water and nutrients. That's what I've just been pounding into your heads the last 2 or 3 slides. So it's the arrangement of soil particles into small clumps, and the way the farmer manages this can affect soil structure. So these are the typical types of soil structure. The first one's granular. This is what you'll find in your upper horizon as a result of fine fibrous roots. You'll get these soil particles that are clumped together in these little granular aggregates. When you have like 6 to 8 to 10 inches of a horizon that's all granular structure, that's really good soil structure. The second one, platy structure, you can find that naturally, but that's often a result of what? Of traffic, of compaction causes this platy structure. Water's not going to move very well through those plates. Prismatic structure is a naturally occurring structure, usually in our fragipans. A fragipan is a dense subsoil layer that's many of our Pennsylvania soils have fragipans, and they have prismatic structure. There's papers and papers written about what causes that, but that's not something that the farmer can really, that's an inherent soil property, and it's usually at least 15 inches down or so. And so that's not something that the farmer can really affect very well. Columnar structure tends to be in more sodic soils. We don't have those in Pennsylvania. Blocky structure in the subsoil will have blocky structure. And then our single grain and massive, that's usually at the bottom of the soil profile, close to the parent material, depending on what the parent material is. So maintaining good soil structure is the goal of soil health and best practices. We want that granular, and if we're lucky enough to have loam soils, that's great, but you can influence the structure with your organic matter and how you manage it. And compaction, of course, destroys structure and prevents good root development. So soils have color. I am going to blip through this because this is an important slide. You'll do soil color in the field when you actually have a soil Munsell color book, and you'll get to try your hand at soil colors in the field. So I'll just talk about some of the important parts. Soil color also tells us how a soil behaves. So that picture on the right, that is very characteristic of a certain kind of landscape or certain kind of soil. If somebody feels like popping that in the chat, what they think it is. So soils that are well drained, like most of our good agricultural soils, are brightly colored. Yes, somebody said, yes, wetland, hydric, yes. So that soil clump on the right is very typical of a hydric soil. A soil that is often wet may have what we call, the unofficial term is mottles of grays and reds and yellow. The official term is called redoxomorphic features. And so, yes, folks that are saying wetlands, anaerobic conditions, that is exactly right. So anaerobic conditions will cause this mottling gray and orange. And so here's a little bit of that soil chemistry that I promised you at the beginning. So what makes our soils brown and red and yellow? It's iron. Dan says, love me some redox. Yep. We have this, I don't know if any of you know Jack Nicholson, but soil scientists, we like to use Jack Nicholson's voice to say redoxomorphic features. So it's redox or mottles. And iron is what gives soil its distinctive red, brown, yellowish color in iron oxides. And that's typically a well-drained condition. When you have anaerobic conditions, which somebody mentioned in the chat, that's where you're so wet, you no longer have oxygen even in the water in the environment. And so iron goes through a chemical change. It goes from a ionic form of 3+ to an ion form of 2+. Don't panic if this chemistry is weirding you out. It just know that iron undergoes a chemical change, and actually it dissolves. And so what's left is the dull colors, which are like what I say are the bare naked colors of the minerals without any iron oxide pigments. And that's characteristics of the poorly drained soil. And then what happens is, let's see, do I have it? Yeah. So going back to this thing, what happens is that iron that's dissolved will hit a pocket of air, and then it will, what we call in chemistry terms, precipitate out or reprecipitate. And it'll form a solid again, and you'll form these solid rust-colored patches. So that's what gives anaerobic soils this characteristic redox blotchy look of grays and oranges. If you dig a hole and you pull this out, you are in a soil that at least at one time was hydric or a wetland. It may not be now, it may not be a wetland now because it was drained or manipulated, but at one time it was a wetland. So on your farm, the one yellow arrow from the cropland, if you dig a hole, it'll be well drained, nice brown, reds, some oranges. But if you dig a hole in this ditch or this swale, that's where you'll get these a little bit more accumulation of organic matter, and you'll get these gray colors and splotchy oranges. So that's the difference between a well-drained soil and a poorly drained soil. And soil color tells you that. So I won't go into this. This just one cell is the chart we use. This way I can describe a soil in Pennsylvania and say this clump of soil is 7.5 YR 5.6, and somebody in California knows exactly what I mean. And we'll go over that in the field, so I won't take a lot of time right now. Okay, soil horizons. This is probably what you guys remember most in your Soils 101 or geomorphology class. Are there any soil judgers out there? If any of you were soil judgers, just do a thumbs up or something in the chat. So this is soils form in place, and they make natural horizons based on the movement of water. And so we keep it simple. We use the alphabet: A, B, and C horizon. A is the topsoil, B is the subsoil, and C is your less developed subsoil. Hey, we've got at least one. Yay. One soil judger out there. So here they are again. An O horizon, you'll see that sometimes in the forest soils where you don't have a lot of disturbance. Yay, we've got another thumbs up for soil judgers. All right. And then you get your surface mineral. That's your A, your O and your A, your B is your subsoil, C is underlying material, and R is your bedrock. No set number of horizons. Sometimes you can have civil scientists arguing about horizons, but typically they're differentiated by changes in color, texture, presence or absence, or increase or decrease of roots, the soil structure, the amount of rock fragments, and redox features. Because where those redox features show up, that's where you have your fluctuating seasonal high water table. Okay, so O is predominantly organic matter at the top. Your A is your topsoil. Notice in this horizon, this A horizon, how abrupt and clear that boundary is between the A and the B. That's a plow. That's because of plowing. We call that an A little p horizon. And that's really characteristic. And like you might be in one of Peter Hoagland's forests, you dig a pit and you see this kind of soil, this abrupt A horizon. That's a clue that that had once been an agricultural soil and that it was now you have a successional forest growing on it. It's very interesting. E horizons, you won't see those very much in ag soils. You see those in our like sandstone uplands, especially this profile on the left. That's typical of what we call Hagerstown soil. And I won't go into it too much, but soils that formed under often I think they think it's more under evergreens like spruce at one time or hemlock will develop these depleted E horizons right under the O horizon. It's very distinctive looking. These are zones of accumulation. We won't go too much into that there. That's not as important. C horizons, you have all different, these are like your floodplain soils that are very young and don't have a whole lot of horizon development. And like the one on the right, who knows what caused that? That could be multiple flooding events, or that could be human influenced. Maybe I saw this profile in a recent presentation about cranberry bogs, where they actually flood the soils and bring in layers of sand every few years. And so when you make the soil profile, it actually looks like this layer cake, kind of like that. All right, drainage class. Frequency and duration of wetness under which the soil formed. We're coming down to the home stretch. Depth to those models that I talked about. And so this is the drainage classes. This is something maybe you want to print out and throw on your bulletin board. So when in Pennsylvania, these are our drainage classes. The soil survey in Pennsylvania, if they called something excessively drained, that means it was at least 60 inches to the fluctuating seasonal high water table. If they called something well drained, that meant they were observing redox around 36 to 40 inches. And these all pertain to agronomic practices. Our soil survey is geared towards farming. So when they say it's well drained, what they mean is it's below the typical root system of, say, a corn plant or a small grain. So that's where the drainage classes come from. And then moderately well-drained soils are 20 to 40 inches to fluctuating high water table, and so on. So these are characteristic of Pennsylvania drainage classes. Get that depth to restrictive feature. This may be important because if you have a restrictive feature, you have a shallower profile. That means you have less soil to hold water, less soil to be a habitat. So sometimes a farmer will have an area of their field that's just doesn't do well. It's dry, and it may be because there's a restrictive layer. So the plants simply don't have as much soil medium to grow in. And so you have two profiles there. The one on the left is in inches, the one on the right is in feet. So which one looks like the shallower soil, left or right? You can type it in the chat or unmute and say it. Which one of these is a relatively shallow soil? Okay, yeah. I'm seeing some responses. Yeah. The one on the right. So the one on the right, you see bedrock at about 1.5 feet, right? And the one on the left, you get down to 64 inches and you see these kind of strange things. That might be like little bits of limestone that are weathering out, but that's a deep soil on the left, and that's a shallow soil on the right. And these are the depth classes in Pennsylvania. Again, this might be something you print out, and you will, I think we are going to give these presentations. You'll get all these presentations in PDF form. And these are depth classes. They look very similar to the drainage classes, don't they? So they are very similar. And that's it for basic soil properties. I ended right at noon, so we are, I think, about 15 minutes behind, but I think that's okay. I don't see any, okay, quick, let me launch one last poll just to make sure you guys are all paying attention, which some of you were. Okay, here's one last poll before you go to lunch. And for those of you who can't see it or can't read it, it is, what is soil structure? So A, the relative percentage of sand, silt, and clay. B, the depth to the restrictive layer. C, the relative amount of organic matter. Or D, the arrangement of soil particles into small clumps called PEDs. So what is soil structure? Either submit your answer in the poll or submit it in the chat. Sharing so I can see my screen. All right, I'm seeing answers come in. Okay. Got 30 responses to the poll and at least a dozen on the chat. So the correct answer is D, the arrangement of soil particles into small clumps called PEDs. And soil structure is important. Why? It's actually something that the farmer can manage with organic matter and other things. And you'll learn as you progress in your career, you'll learn all about soil health and how farmers are able to do that, and the conservation practices that we support that also can influence soil structure and soil health. All right, so it's 12:03, so let's come back at 12:30. You have half an hour for lunch, and we'll go into biosecurity when we get back. And we've got Dan Ludwig, Pete Vanderstad, and Dan Ludwig will be back after lunch at 12:30. All right, thanks all. We'll see you in half an hour. we're going to get started in just a few minutes here. Pete, are you there? Is your,
Hey, I just got here.
okay, cool. All right. Well, we still got.
I'm going to try to
Mhm.
see if I can load my PowerPoint
Okay.
in Teams. So I'm at the PowerPoint. It says PowerPoint, but I don't have that in there. So what do you do to get it to come in to search for it? I'll browse OneDrive. I'll browse my computer.
Yeah, browse your computer. I can see
Okay.
if I can.
I'm going to the documents. Training, Visual Basics, Biosecurity, open. I guess it's loading. Still loading.
Okay, something's happening.
There it is.
It is
Yep.
spinning. Let's see.
Biosecurity
Yep,
deep dive.
I see it. Okay. All right, everybody. So we are 12:30. We are back from lunch. And like to introduce Pete Vanderstappen. He's a retired state conservation engineer for Pennsylvania NRCS, and he is back to help train the next generation of conservation professionals. So great. Pete, take it away.
Well, hey, thanks for the introduction, Yuri, and it's good to be back for today's thing. I worked with NRCS as an engineer for over 44 years, starting in Virginia for a couple years and back to Pennsylvania. I was a shoreline engineer at one time. I spent a couple years doing dam construction and installation for flood control dams, but most of my career was spent in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, working on BMPs related to engineering. I have my name on a lot of manure pits out there, and it's a legacy. I don't know if that's good or bad, but the good news is some of my old manure pits are getting rebuilt, so that's a good thing. Anyway, so I retired, but I am working part-time for Pennsylvania and for the National EWP. And with that, we're going to start our presentation and get rid of my ugly mug. And you notice all behind me, you see that fishing scene? That's fishing in Florida before the red tide hit. I'll leave it at that. Okay, so today my discussion is going to be about biosecurity, and the state engineer Tim Peters said do a deep dive into biosecurity. So I took his word on that and said biosecurity deep dive, and we're going to really try to get into a lot of different details about biosecurity. So what we're going to look at is what is biosecurity, some general principles. We're going to look at the national policy, federal policy for national, where it comes from and through NRCS, but also APHIS, and burrow into it as to why you should care about biosecurity as an individual. Pennsylvania state policy related to NRCS and some other agencies. We're going to look at also issues by animal species, some other biosecurity concerns, some practical protocols that I think are some good practices they're not really part of biosecurity, but not really talked about that much. I'm going to do a wrap up, and then I'm also going to have a little bonus section that I stole from a PDA on a deep dive into procedures for donning and doffing PPE material. So we're going to try to cover all that here in the next 45 minutes or so. So this is really critical. What is the definition of biosecurity? And I'm going to spend the time to read this thing. A series of management practices designed to reduce the risk of disease agents being introduced and spread within animal populations. That's the key first sentence there, period. But here's the rest of it. Similar management practices are used to prevent the spread of invasive or noxious plant species or for prevention of plant disease. In broad terms, it refers to anything designed to prevent the transfer of disease-causing organisms. I think the key thing about the definition of biosecurity is, at least in the agricultural world and most of from the engineering side, we think about the animals and disease in the animals. But from the conservation kind of perspective, looking at the entire plan, conservation plan you're doing, there's a lot of other opportunities that you need to think about biosecurity, in addition to concerns with diseases related to animals. So keep that in mind. So overarching principles of biosecurity. This group of 50 plus individuals here, a lot of diversity and backgrounds where you're at. Most are new in their careers, but working for not only NRCS, but affiliates, conservation districts, other agencies and stuff like that. And really, biosecurity principles are this is kind of a general thought here of the process that kind of applies no matter which agency you're really working for. These are kind of the principles you need to keep in mind. Policy can never cover all possible threats. NRCS writes policy guidelines for biosecurity in different situations, but it's really difficult to write something that covers every potential situation out there. Always act to prevent spread by person, tools, or vehicle. So it's not only you carrying something around, it's also the equipment that you're using, whether it's your boots, your survey equipment that got manure on it, or the vehicle you're driving. All these things could be part of biosecurity risk. Always contact the landowner to be aware of their protocol. I think that's really critical that you talk to the landowners up front to make sure that you know what their protocol is for biosecurity. And certainly if you're in the dealing with the swine industry and the poultry industry, most of those folks definitely have some major biosecurity protocol that they're following all the time. But keep this in mind, as a minimum, you got to adhere to theirs. But in many cases, our protocol for NRCS protocol will exceed landowner concerns. And that's pretty common if you're going out to visit a dairy farm. Yeah, some do have signs up for biosecurity and beef operations. You just don't hear a lot of farmers talking about, at least in the dairy industry, talking about biosecurity. So just because they don't talk about it, you as an agency person need to practice your agency biosecurity minimum requirements. The other thing too is avoid areas of potential high risk as a common practice. And I listed here swine, chicken, duck, and turkey facilities. And I'm not talking about the outside of the facility. I'm talking about going inside a swine hog facility, going inside a chicken operation, or ducks or turkeys, stepping inside the building. Once you step inside there, that's where biosecurity becomes a big risk. And the best way to avoid any of that risk is just don't go inside. And I have some ideas on how to handle some situations there. And during any disease outbreak, follow state veterinarian and or APHIS biosecurity measures. And avoid these sites is the best option. So if a site, like right now we have some Pennsylvania sites, and I'll talk about that in a minute, avoid going to those sites, and work with the producer to handle items by phone, offsite, or possibly delay. So if you have a producer that's in an actual biosecurity situation where his flock is getting put down, he may not be worried about his conservation plan today or tomorrow, or getting his new manure storage implemented. So you need to take consideration of that, but certainly we're not going to go out there and check on those things during those critical times for the landowner. So just keep that in mind, and we'll talk about that later. So where does this all come from? It comes from a USDA policy. The guidance, amazingly, is look at section Title 130, General Manual, Part 403, Homeland Security and Crisis Responsibilities. So you never think about biosecurity as being part of Homeland Security, but it's part of our national Homeland Security to protect our production of food, fiber, agriculture, and those kind of things. So it really stems from that whole concept of we need to maintain our base of animal production and food production, all those kind of things. So it comes out of Homeland Security. So NRCS is part of the USDA interagency group. It's part of the National Food and Agriculture. And the lead agency on that is APHIS. So they're typically the lead agency for all this stuff. And if a crisis happens, or like we have here at AI in Pennsylvania, APHIS will be the lead agency working with the state veterinarian and those folks to how they want to handle those kind of things. There's multiple guidelines for USDA employees, and by association, anybody that works for NRCS or an affiliate need to definitely follow those same protocols that the NRCS staff are doing in traveling about and following biosecurity procedures. And there's other agencies out there, the Foreign Animal Disease Preparedness and Response stuff. You get guidelines for biosecurity from 2016, a National Plant Emergency Management Framework. There's several other groups out there that have some guidelines, but in a general sense, it all comes down from Homeland Security, USDA, and APHIS, and the states. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of those. So why should you care? It's always a challenge. Some things are pretty remote, but if you take a look at this map, it's probably hard to see on your screen, but you see all these yellow blotches in there, and those are multiple flocks in Pennsylvania that have been affected by HPIA. So, and this was March the 16th. That's when I took that view. There's a up-to-date map showing all these different sites, and certainly Pennsylvania is in the thrust of this thing. And those are the big flocks. Through other sources, I did hear that the interesting thing was, and this really relates to, I think about the poultry industry. That's a big spot, and we got to maybe avoid those things, and we'll talk about that later here. But the biggest concern right now is the private flocks. These are small flocks on small agricultural operations, and especially in northern Lebanon County, where they have a difficult time getting out to see those sites. So it's a challenge to monitor and check and manage those small flocks, which could be the source of spread to the larger integrators. So that's a key thing. I want to talk to you about, so you notice the map, the yellow, the three different colors in there, the zone around the actual facility, and then you see the darker color, then you see the yellow out there. What does that mean? And it's kind of amazing to look at the APHIS zones. The infected zone, that can be out to about 1.8 miles from the actual site. So it's just not the headquarters. They consider that the infected zone, which is 1.5 miles or 1.75 miles around it, windblown type stuff, whatever issues. But that goes out at 1.8 miles. The buffer zone they're talking about is 4.2 miles from the center of whatever that facility is. The control area is 6.2 miles out. So from that diameter, that circle is 12.4 miles. And then you look at the surveillance zone, it's at least 6.2 miles or more. So if you go back, we'll go back one slide real quick. You notice that once you get a couple farms infected, or even if they could be 12 or 15 miles apart, all of a sudden, and with the close proximity of all the different let's say poultry producers here in Pennsylvania, I think of like northern Lebanon County, they're only a 0.5 mile apart. So once you get one infected farm, the zone of control covers a lot of territory and covers a lot of different operations, not just the one that's infected. So that's why you really, the overlapping concerns really come pretty fast because of the close proximity of all these operations to each other. And I want to say one other thing about APHIS biosecurity. They do have different levels of control, and we're not going to go into those today. They have level 0, which is basically doing nothing, level 1, 2, and 3. And we'll talk about the normal NRCS biosecurity system is a level 1. Not going to get into that detail. And one last thing about this whole AI thing, it's not just on in Pennsylvania. This is across the country. It's a major impact. Maybe 40 to 50 million birds have been put down to date. And so it's a major impact. And all of us here, if we enjoy poultry products and eggs, we know the price of eggs went from, could have been 2 years ago, 80 cents a dozen, to now could be $4, $5, $6 a dozen. So it has a major impact on the egg production and costs. So current PA NRCS guidance due to AI. So within the last week or two, Tim Peters put out some general guidance in a news flash for the NRCS folks and the affiliates. And I kind of summarized them here. Yeah. Staff should be aware of infected flocks and avoid driving through those areas if practical. Well, you look at that map, if you happen to be in a county, probably like Lancaster County, where you get a couple flocks infected, you won't be able to go, you don't want to drive through those areas if you don't have to, but certainly it's a challenge to avoid driving through the general vicinity of those 2, 3, 4 miles out from those places. So just keep that in mind. Staff should be conscious of high waterfowl concentrations. Farm pond geese and ducks could be carriers. So we all have, most farms don't have that, but if you happen to know an operation that they have, they raise ducks or geese on the range or have pond, different waterfowl on their property, maybe that's not a good time to be going and visiting those particular properties. Or if you're going out there, avoid those areas where those waterfowl are congregated and dropping manure and all those kind of things. Encounter with birds, associated manure or mortality in these triggers a 72-hour waiting period before visiting other sites. So if you happen to be out on one of those operations, they have a concentration of waterfowl or geese, ducks, or whatever animals that are just droppings out around, you go to that particular operation, but you don't go to another operation for 72 hours. So it's pretty good. And then always practice good biosecurity practices. Avoid animal areas unless needed. Park away from animal housing areas. Take a long way to avoid driving close to poultry barns and associated facilities. It's not the thing of drive right up to the building and park there. Sitting in the ventilation area of a poultry barn is probably not a good thing to do. If you're going to a poultry operation, for whatever reason, you need to be aware of the fact that you shouldn't be parking right next to the building if you don't have to. Or if you're going to do some other activities, don't park near those facilities. Just some general, guidance that they want you to follow. Guidance for visiting non-AI poultry operations if you must. So check with the producer. If possible, meet off-site paperwork type activities. So if you're just doing paperwork, you're doing a follow-up on some other activity, maybe the producer can come down to the office or meet you off-site somewhere at the Walmart or Wawa or something, not Walmart, but Wawa or Cherokee Hill or something else, and meet off-site and take care of paperwork so you don't have to drive yourself or your government vehicle and those kind of things onto there. Now here's the challenge, folks. Here's a challenge for us, for those sites where we may be implementing conservation practices currently. An example would be if you have a poultry facility and they are scheduled this year to build a new stacking facility, which is probably located right at the end of the barn. So it says here, if the implementing conservation practice at headquarters, wear a Tyvek suit in addition to rubber boots. This is the first time you've seen this where NRCS staff and affiliates are going to be required to wear Tyvek suits. Wash boots on site. Use suits and booties and new garbage bag and leave at site. Discuss location with operator. So you don't want to, if items get contaminated, you don't want to drag them somewhere else. Hopefully you can take them off and put them in a garbage bag and drop them somewhere where the producer can pick them up and put them in their trash system and hand them out that way. Park away from buildings and beyond ventilation zones. Wash car after event, and no visits to other poultry for 3 days. So this is guidance for visiting non-AI poultry operations. So that's just a regular poultry operation out there that has no issues or known issues. And you're going to go out there and you actually have to implement a plan. You have to physically go on the property at the headquarters there at the poultry barns and visit them. You're supposed to do that. But key is, before you do any of this kind of stuff, you need to clear this with your supervisor, the ASTE for operations, and the state engineer. So I think what they're saying here at the NRCS state offices, this is going to be a case-by-case review, checking out what's the reason we need to get out there, what are we planning, why is it so critical, are there some options. So they're really going to look at a bunch of things before we start having folks go out there and wear Tyvek suits every time they go out. And I'm going to show you at the end of my presentation, I do have a bunch of slides on how to properly go out to a site and actually use a Tyvek suit, how to put it on, how to take it off, and all those steps. So it's not just jumping out there, jumping out of the car, throwing on some booties, put on a Tyvek suit, run around, come back and take the suit off, take the bag off, and throw it in the garbage bag and go home. There's quite a procedure, and we'll show you all about that. But anyway, key word here is check with your supervisor and state office management to see if this is what you really need to do for those sites where we're implementing something on that farm, especially at the headquarters there. If you're doing something, putting a grass waterway out in the field, this may be a totally different topic, but certainly if you're at the headquarters, right at the buildings and doing a manure stacking facility or some sort of a mortality complex, those the sites would trigger this type of level of biosecurity. Guidance for visiting known AI sites. So these are sites, and that was on that map. These are sites that already have the chicken. They've already identified as an issue at that particular operation. They've come in there within a couple days and they've foamed the birds. The birds have been euthanized. And my current understanding is they're doing composting on site to get rid of the mortality. They're not taking it to a landfill. They're not burying it on site, but they're actually doing composting on site. And that composting is a very controlled. They make sure they have enough carbon. They check temperatures. They go through proper turning cycles and all those kind of things. And that being said, my first answer to those, don't visit these sites for any reasons. There's no reason for NRCS to be out there. So APHIS, Pennsylvania Department of Ag, and all those folks are working with this landowner to do the composting and take care of the mortality and those kind of things. If we would happen to have, or we have some sort of plan to do something, then we revert back to the previous slide. But normally, if they're in an active process of doing it, there's no reason to drag NRCS staff, affiliates, vehicles, and all those kind of things out there. So my first response is you shouldn't really go out there anyway. The process can take several months to do the proper composting and everything else. So there is, from that point of view, that the landowner is, out of production for several months. The one comment I will make, and it's not happening right now in Pennsylvania, is NRCS could be called in for assistance in citing issues. And what I'm talking about there, if they're doing external composting, which I think they're doing internal, but if they're doing external composting, they need some land area around the property to do it. And sometimes they may contact NRCS for some guidance to make sure that the selected land area doesn't have soil issues and those kind of things. And those are a unique one-on-one situation. And you would run it up through your supervisor to get to Uri Platt and state soil scientist to take a look at that. But my current understanding, and maybe Uri, you can chime in on this. I think they're doing in-house composting. So that's my understanding. So. What's that?
There was a comment, I think from Dan, about a lot of outdoor composting going on.
So they have an option to contact us, but Dan might know because of his wife's activities there. But so Uri, have they contacted us at all about that?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, that's okay. But yep. There is an agreement that they can contact us. So hopefully they've looked at the site and the guys doing the composting from Penn State Extension, they have lots of experience. So hopefully it won't be an issue. But just raising the point that could happen on a unique site where they would want some guidance from NRCS, and certainly work through Uri and go from there. Thanks for the response there. Okay. Mm-hmm. Biosecurity policy during normal times. Kind of a misnomer. What are normal times these days? None right now, but this is the typical policy that we normally follow. Okay, it's found in the General Manual 180 Amendment number 7. Follow the following principle: when contacting landowners, discuss biosecurity and follow their protocol if it meets or exceeds NRCS policy. So sometimes they might have more biosecurity than we have. I've had some examples in my career where it was I think it was a beef or ag operation, and for whatever reason, we get out there, we wear plastic boots and stuff on, but the guy was adamant about everybody walking through it. He had a little basin, I call it, with some sort of dip solution in it, and he wanted everybody to dip their shoes in that. So that was his extra biosecurity, and we adhered to that. Plastic slip covers are only for brief visits. You'll experience this during boot camp. Those plastic slip covers are nice for a quick little visit maybe, maybe a little bit of walking around. But boy, if you have to walk any kind of distance, they don't last too long, especially the ones that we provide. They're pretty low end. And the real reality is that technical visits, if your visit is to go out to an ag producer, dairy operation, and you're going to help do a survey around the headquarters there because we're doing some ACA work, building manure storage, whatever, and you are going to be walking maybe through some cow patties and concrete lots and those kind of things, you definitely need to have some sort of washable boots on that can be properly washed and cleaned up at the end of that cleaned and disinfected. And folks, here's the challenge. I know a lot of folks don't like I'm the old school from the Tingleys and slip over Tingleys and those kind of things, which I think work the best. Good traction. The cleats aren't very deep. Now, a lot of folks will have waterproof work boots or whatever. Sounds great, but if you can you get all that manure out between the cleats? Can you and do you really want to put a lot of soap water and disinfectant on your boots? So keep that in mind. But bottom line is, for on-site construction type activities where you're walking around, you need to have some good boots. Each government vehicle shall have a supply of disposable booties, brush, bucket, scrub pan, dish detergents, and at least 1 can of Lysol spray. So, it's your responsibility if you're driving a government vehicle before you go out to a farm to double check to make sure that they do have all the supplies in there so you can practice biosecurity. The one thing that's not listed on there, and that works 99% of the time, or well, during the non-freezing time of the year, is carry a couple gallons of water with you. So you have the water supply to fill up the tub, throw in some soap, wash your boots and those kind of things. And then that activity needs to be done away from the source of manure and those kind of things. So you want to be parked. That's why you park away from all those facilities. So when you walk out to your vehicle and clean your boots and stuff, you can step right into your vehicle and you're fine. Recommended to limit visits of operations to same animal 1 per day. That's a tough one. We've certainly been doing that for poultry for a long time. Visits to non-livestock areas is not limited. So if you're going to multiple farms looking at waterways, diversion terraces, and you're not at the headquarters, that's no problem. Here's a summary that's been, I think I actually helped put together many years ago. But if you just take a look at this, hopefully it's posted in every office. But it does talk about the NRCS biosecurity policy basics, and keep clean, avoiding personnel, vehicles, contact with manure, feed, dirty water, runoff, soil treated, all that kind of stuff. Avoid handling or contacting animals, and we'll talk about that again later. Visit 1 poultry or swine per day. This poultry and swine is the critical ones to avoid. Driving the multiple operations in a day. It just raises red flags if anything that does go down the road, and follow additional protocols. If you're going to a site and there's issues there, like I said, we shouldn't be going there. But certainly, if they have additional protocols, we need to follow all those. Again, the same thing: clean, disinfecting your rubber boots. And one last thing too is talking about clothing. NRCS doesn't issue you clothing, but certainly, if you're going to these operations today, you should. Those clothes should be washed and cleaned before you wear them out the next day to a different operation. So keeping your clothing clean is a critical just for the general biosecurity practice. So I'm going to switch topics a little bit and think about, I thought about this the other night. I said, are you a biosecurity threat? So I'm thinking about you as individuals. Could you be a threat for biosecurity, not because of your work activity, because of your home life? Do you hunt waterfowl or game birds? And I'm sure in this group of 40 or 50, we have some pretty avid hunters out there that like to go out and shoot ducks and geese and all that kind of stuff. That's all great and fine. But when you do those kind of activities, you need to make sure that you do some things, extra things. The other folks that could be in a problem might be maybe you have a few chickens. Maybe you have a few chickens out in the backyard to get your dozen eggs, or you happen to be next to a neighbor that has chickens running all over your property. Hopefully not. So that's another. The backyard chickens are a big issue. And the last one is there may be a few of you folks out there that, hey, yeah, I'm working for NRCS, a conservation district, or whoever, And I happen to have come from a swine operation or a poultry operation, and I work there on the weekends, whatever. So if you are any of these folks, you need to take some special extra precautions to address this, because you might be in yourself as a biosecurity threat. So don't wear your hunting clothes to the office, and if you must, wash them. So hopefully, if you're hunting in one type of your Carhartts, you're not bringing them. You're not hunting in ducks Saturday morning and wearing those same Carhartts into the office because you're going out to the field that day to go to visit a duck operation. So you really need to keep that in mind. That you got to keep those, or don't use those same clothes, or have clean those clothes before you're doing that. Hunting boots are clean. You're going out hunting, walking through mud and bolt. Don't bring those muddy boots into the office. And contaminate the office or contaminate the floor of the vehicle, those kind of things. It just sounds pretty simple, but it could happen. If you have chickens, change your clothes and footwear before going to work. Don't dress to go to work and run out there and feed the darn chickens, then come to work. Well, you're walking in chicken poo and all that kind of stuff. So get those things done, then change into your proper attire to get back to work. If you have a large chicken or hog operation, protocols, you got the same, that it's going to be a challenge. I don't know if anybody's run into that problem, but certainly if you're working a chicken operation that morning, you really shouldn't be going to chicken operation at work that day. So, these weird situations, probably need to talk to your supervisor, but I'm just trying to raise an awareness that this is a possible source of biosecurity. And like I said, unique situations need to be discussed with your supervisor. And let's see if any comment, good composting, goods biosecurity, wash your boots, remove all organic material, Lysol. Yeah, and we'll show you that in a couple minutes here on the details. But just something to think about. Are you a biosecurity threat in yourself and your personal activities? Just keep those in mind, especially when like now the AI situation is out there. So keep that stuff in mind. So I got some other common practices that I follow that really aren't in the you don't read about it in biosecurity protocol for even NRCS, but I have a couple I always practice for dairy operations. And the key one here is you really should start with the calves first, then heifers, and then mature cows. You start the calves, the smallest animal. You don't want to carry any diseases coming out of a mature cow off the a cow that has manure on it or whatever, and then you pet the cow or you're walking through cow manure, and then you get to the calf pens and the calf runs up to you or sticks his head out the pen and licks your boot and grabs that manure. So you really should start at the calf operation first and work your way up to bigger animals. But this has its backdraws too. It's interesting to note that animals that are under, especially dairy heifers and calves, that are under 24 months of age have the highest potential to shed E. coli 0157. And shedding is, the manure coming out of that particular calf. If they do carry any E. coli, these smaller animals are the ones that most likely could have it, if they have it at all. And so the interesting thing about it is, if they happen to be shedding and you go up to that calf and pet it, it doesn't take a very little contact on your hand. You could actually potentially get the E. coli 0157. It's pretty easy to catch if those animals are shedding. So, running up and petting a calf may not be a good idea. So my suggestion is, hey, we walk up these calf pens, just like in the picture there. A lot of them have a little bit of bedding around each pen, especially the outdoor hutches. You don't need to walk up to them and stomp right next to the pen. You can stay away. You can count from a distance. You can see what the problems are, and you don't need to walk right in amongst all the pens and through the manured area or any juice coming out of those pens. So just keep that in mind. It's probably just get close enough to do what you need to do to look at stuff and ascertain if everything's okay or not, but avoiding direct walking through that area. Avoid walking in feed bunk areas. And you see a picture on the lower right when there's a lot of operations where, yes, they have a feed bunk down in the middle of the barn. They drive their equipment down through there, walk down the middle, but don't be walking down through the actual feed manger portion of that alleyway. If your boots are 100% clean, maybe no issue. But if you've been walking around the farm in other areas, you might be picking up manure from other locations, and you don't want to drag that manure into the actual feed bunk. So just keep that in mind. These are all good practices that I think are always helpful, and be aware that producers' concerns, or they may not be not concerned, but we should be concerned. So I'll leave it at that. Does anyone have any other ideas on good practices for dairy operations? I'm looking at the chat here. I'm going to look for one response, folks. I don't want 50 response. I want one response. Anybody else have a good idea on some extra biosecurity for dairy operations? Let's see if anybody has any response. Oh, I got somebody here. What'd they say here? I thought I got a response here. Let me look at the chat. Hang on, folks. Being technologically challenged. Washing hands and hand sanitizer are your friends at any time. Okay, hey, Allie, I really appreciate that, and that's right. When you're all done, all said and done with this whole visiting the site and stuff, definitely do some sanitizing before you leave the site. Thank you. Okay, onward. Poultry operations. Right now we have this, normal operations, one per day during non-AI times. Avoid going inside, even if the producer allows it, unless they provide Tyvek suit, booties, etc. And I think this is a challenge. Normally, and I've been in a lot of poultry operations, especially for litter burning and those kind of things. It's always, we always like the producers are always willing to show you that their operation stuff like. But I found some of the better producers will say, hey, they don't, they practice good biosecurity, and they don't want you to go inside their building to get in there and pick up contaminants or wherever you've been to drag something into the facility. And if they really want you inside, they can provide a suit. And I had that happen once. We were looking at a special heating system in poultry operations, and the farmer had invited us along with a dealership selling the product. And when we got there, the a veterinarian was there also, and they provided me the booties and a suit and a cap, so we could go inside and take a look at this heating system in an active poultry producing. So they provide the materials, and then when I left, I went through the process of taking the materials off, putting in a garbage bag, and leaving it at the site. But that's pretty rare. So if you need photos inside a building and the farmer says, hey, give the farmer your camera, or the farmer has cameras now. Everybody has cameras in their phones. If you need a few pictures just to see what their operation looks like, let them take the pictures and send them to you. You don't have to go inside. There's no real reason. The other possibility could be energy improvements on poultry operations, like changing the lights out. Maybe we're adding insulation in the ceiling, which would probably require the flock's not there. But some other operations, you don't want to do any inspection when the birds are there. So that's probably a critical thing too. And if the birds are there, they get these things done. You need verification. Ask the landowner, take pictures of whatever products you need or activities that were done to verify that they were properly installed. And the other interesting thing about bird operations, they do a lot of times have all this stuff, plus they have some sort of foot dip when you go in and out of them. So keep that in mind. The last thing I'll talk a little bit about is swine operations. Large integrators all require that you must shower in and out at the site. So I'm not sure why any of us would need to go inside a hog facility, but if you go inside, they're going to have a room, a changing room. You're going to change out of your clothes, maybe take a shower, and they'll give you a pair of generic coveralls that probably won't fit correctly, and other underclothing, so you can walk out in the hog facility where the growing rooms are, the finishing, all that kind of stuff, and check things out. I've never wanted to do that, nor had any reasons for us to do that. So if you want to see what inside of one of those facilities look like, my suggestion is go online and look at other photos, go to video clips. There's YouTube guys showing all these kind of operations online already. Or if you want to really see inside one of those facilities, go to an open house someday if they're opening up a new facility. But there's a lot of ways to look inside these operations if you want to get a better understanding without physically going into that particular operation. So definitely not a place you want to go. The other thing I want to touch on slightly is, we talked about the biosecurity for animals, and we talked about the AI here for poultry. But if you would go to the APHIS website, all operate understanding animal diseases. There's a great APHIS website and shows all these different animals. And if you click each animal species, whether it's a dairy, goat, chicken, hog, swine, lamb, sheep, and some other ones, they will list all the different potential types of diseases that those animals may carry and whether you should be concerned with them or not. So it's just an interesting opportunity to look at some of the other things that animal agriculture faces on the disease side of it, and some of those can be spread from farm to farm, and certainly you don't want to be the one out there contacting animals, spreading it from location to location. But I'm not going into more detail on that. But here's an opportunity if you want to go to that site and learn about, what are the different diseases out there that might affect swine or goats or whatever. So good opportunity to check those things out and get some more, build your awareness level. Other biosecurity issues, back in the day when I talked about there, back early in my presentation about biosecurity, it's more than just animals, it's invasive species. And I'm glad that several of the presenters early this morning talked about the regulations for invasive species and those kind of things. Pennsylvania has over 300 invasive plants, insects, and animals that impact PA. And go to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture website to see detailed information on all of these. I have a little shot here, the spotted lanternfly. That's the current one that you see a lot about. And hear about spotted lanternfly, first found in Berks County in 2014, spreading from the southeast PA to the other parts of the state. A lot of the NRCS staff have a sticker or thing. They went through a short training course hanging in your vehicle in the mirror there. And certainly as the season comes again for spotted lanternfly, when you go to operations, we don't want to drag spotted lanternflies from one location to another. Check your vehicle out. Make sure there's none inside your vehicle and some other activities you're supposed to do, but keep that in mind. And we're sort of trying to help not be the ones spreading that particular pest. So here's my wrap up before I get done. Biosecurity guidance comes from various sources, but they all follow similar practices. So the general trend, the overarching principle is, if you have biosecurity, we all function at a level 1 where we're putting the plastic boots on or permanent boots on, we're washing and those things on all operations, regardless of what the situation is at a low level. And then if you have situations or potential situations, we're going to step up our level of biosecurity to the maximum at a quarantine site or a site that has an infected population where you're doing all the biosecurity stuff, the proper taking on and off, all that kind of stuff. Plus you're washing your wheels and you're going to wash your vehicle, all those kind of things, 72-hour wait, a lot of things. So the level of biosecurity varies from a site to site. Some industries are more concerned to impact than others. Certainly the swine and poultry are the ones that practice biosecurity the most. The dairy industry, some farmers do to some level, but it's a low key. But I think as conservation folks, even different agencies, we need to be aware of that and practice better than some of the producers want us to do. We need to practice a minimum level and exceed what the producer does if they have little or no concern. We can still practice biosecurity. They say don't worry about it. Well, you're working for an employer that says, hey, you got to wear the boots or you got to clean off afterwards. Do those kind of things. Avoid contact with affected animal sector and production when that industry is in an outbreak. We're doing that right now. We're avoiding poultry. And if we do have to go out, we have all kinds of extra procedures we're going to do. Ask questions, get approvals when in doubt. Like I said, it's a changing dynamic. It depends on if you're working for NRCS or you're an affiliate or your conservation district or your PDA or what your job is may affect what you can or can't do and what permissions you may need to implement that. And I want to go through this. I think this is really important. It's enlightening to watch this next section. I didn't say exciting. I said enlightening. So this I stole from a PDA presentation on reducing the risk of disease transmission on livestock poultry premises. So this is the education thing they gave them a couple years ago. So first one here is exiting the vehicle at the premises. Your shoes must not touch the ground. Put on clean disposable booties before exiting the vehicle. So you just don't pull up the site and jump out and then put on your booties. No. You got to have clean booties on before you step out of the vehicle. That's step one. Next, don a head cover and coveralls. So you're putting on your PPE Tyvek suit. A pair of rubber boots or a second pair of disposable boots is advised and may be required. So depending on how that what goes, and depending on the regulations there, you might actually have put on another set of disposable boots. And there's some protocols as why you might need to do that. Add gloves, a respirator, and eye protection if necessary. That's probably on extreme site, but that could happen. So boots. In some cases, rubber boots are needed over disposable booties. Use in wet environments and rocky things. Use when on farm for long periods of time. Use on high-risk premises. Make sure boots are cleaned and disinfected before putting them on. In some cases, you can wear 2 pairs of disposable booties instead of rubber boots. Now, the disposable booties in that picture are the clear plastic. I think they're like 4 mil. I worked with one of the professors, a retired professor at Penn State in poultry, and he had a nicer, more durable pullover booty that actually had some traction on it. So that probably would be suitable. But when you have these really lightweight booties, it makes sense that you might have to put 2 on, or they're saying put the booty on, then put clean boots on top of that. So boots can be very critical. So keep that in mind, and how much you're walking around, and we destroy them in the process. So after the visit, here comes the big challenge. So removing disposable gloves safely, avoid touching the outside surface of the dirty gloves with your bare hands as you remove them. So it's you got to think like you're a surgeon in an operating room. You got to be, take them off properly. Dispose of gloves in a trash bag. Never reuse disposable gloves. Wash or sanitize your hands immediately after removing your gloves. So pretty straightforward, but you got to work, how do you take those off? But peeling them from the inside out, I guess. Removing coveralls. So remove coveralls inside out. Do not touch the outside surface of the coveralls with your bare hands. Remember, you took your gloves off. Now your hands are clean, so you got to work on taking your coveralls off and peeling them down. So you're basically going inside out, and place in trash bag and leave on the premise if you have permission. So again, if you're pulling all this PE stuff off, put it in a plastic bag, and hopefully you've talked to the producer about leaving it on your way out. Don't pick all the stuff up, put it in the trash bag, then run across the property to put it in a trash can. You've defeated the purpose of the whole process. Protocol: clean your rubber boots before you remove them. So if you had rubber boots on, you got to clean them, disinfect them on the site so they're scrubbing, cleaning, getting all the organic material out of there. Do not let clean boots touch the ground. So this is going to be a challenge here. So you got the clean boots, you're pulling them off, and now you place the clean boots in a clean container in the vehicle trunk and let them dry completely. Continue to wear plastic booties until ready to get in your vehicle. So this is why you're wearing that plastic booty and then wearing your boots over top. So once you take your boots off to clean them, you'll still have another layer of protection with your plastic booties that you have them on. So now you can walk over to the vehicle, and there's another step for that. Cleaning and disinfection of the vehicle. So you still have your boots on there. You're getting ready to leave. Before leaving apprentice, you may need, depending on the protocol at the site, spray the tires, wheel wells, and undercarriage. Again, avoiding parking in contaminated areas or in a clean, starting by parking in a clean zone might be a solution to that. Remove all obvious organic materials before disinfection. So your car needs to be, basically this won't work too if the car is not clean. So if you drive a bunch of mud, it's dangerous. Anyway, go through a car wash if necessary. So that's probably another protocol. If you do all the disinfection stuff on the wheel wells and all that kind of stuff, you're going to go to car wash anyway. Clean and disinfect all equipment and reusable supplies taken onto the premises. Some things you can wash them, something you can spray Lysol on. There's different things you can do. You can use your cell phone on site. It could be contaminated and will need cleaning. If you must take it with you, seal it in a plastic bag. Dispose of trash in trash bag. Leave it on site if you have permission. You probably have to leave it on site on the way out. You know, once you get back in your car, and you're ready to leave, find out where you can kind of take the bag and dump it out. But before we get to that, re-entering your vehicle. To re-enter your vehicle, sit on the seat while keeping your feet outside the vehicle. Remove disposable booties and dispose of them in a trash bag, leaving it on the site. So when you get out, when you leave, you're sitting in there on the seat, and now you got to take your disposable booties off, pulling them inside out, and then not touching the dirty side in, putting them in a trash bag and not touching any other dirty stuff, and then get them in that bag, seal that up, and now you're probably ready to leave the site. Last steps, spray your shoes or boots with disinfectant, paying attention to the soles. So even after like the clean and dry up, you want to spray them just as extra precaution with Lysol. I know some folks have even talked about, spraying their the seat of the car and stuff with Lysol too is another option. And the last one, finally, use hand sanitizer. Again, probably sanitize and wipe your hands. So you cleaned your hands early on, clean them again. I really wanted I add this part of the presentation. I thought it was interesting that if NRCS is going to move forward on Tyvek of some sort on these unique situations, it's quite a process, folks, of putting on and taking off Tyvek suits. So it's always a challenge. Yeah. I get one comment here. Tyvek suits and snow is you're going to do some boot skiing. So anyway, other than that, Yuri, do I have a question that's supposed to be pulled up for this presentation?
I didn't see one pertaining to yours.
Okay. I think there was one, and I think the simple question was, oh, I know what it was. We're going to go back. Well, no, we won't go back to it. But my simple question is a true and false question. And my question said biosecurity only involves animals, period. And that was my true and false question. Biosecurity only includes animals. So if at least 3 people say true or false, and there we get a false, we get false coming on there, great. Right, because my mindset as an engineer, I'm thinking animal agriculture, but certainly invasive species and all the other things could be problematic, moving weed seeds and invasive insects and all those things all over the place. So very good. Appreciate the responses back on that. And any questions from the crowd? And I would ask a question quick of our next presenter, Mr. Ludwig. Maybe can you give us a little synopsis of what is going on? Are they composting the existing mortality outside? I think your wife works for APHIS. Do you have any comments on that you could enlighten the group?
Well, sure. So yeah, a lot of these big farms, they may start composting inside, but then they are moving them outside. So they are building large rows of composting, and they have the subject matter experts there that they determine, the carbon and nitrogen ratio for that composting. So they have it down to a science on how much carbon they need to bring in. So a lot of these sites, it's truckload after truckload after truckload of mulch and wood chips. But yeah, a lot of these sites, there is a lot of outdoor composting.
Are they trying to do the phase 1 inside, or just kind of wait until the weather to warm up?
Good question. I'd have to ask on that, but some of these sites, they don't have the room. The barns aren't big enough for it, so they go straight to
Outside,
outdoor.
Yeah.
Outdoor composting. And
okay. Well, hey, thanks for the heads up on that. And I know that NRCS has some guidance and that kind of stuff, but we've decided in the best protocol has been go with the experts and let them deal with these situations and avoid going to these operations. So with that, I'm done, Yuri, and on to I think Dan is the next presenter and next presenter. So thanks everyone, appreciate it, and I hope to see you in the field sometime.
Thank you, Pete. And I just wanted to point out that Peter Hoagland posted some links in the chat, and Pete had mentioned this, that again, the biosecurity isn't just avian influenza. We've got the invasive species, and Peter posted those links.
I appreciate that, Peter. And like I said, it's biosecurity is a fluid type thing. It's always changing. And I tell you what, for the field people, I was in the field for many years. Practicing biosecurity on a day-to-day basis, especially in dairy and going to multiple farms in a day, it takes a special. You got to keep after it, folks. It's just tough. Don't only do it when the state office staff or the area office staff come out. If you're a field office technician, well, and you guys are all new, but if you're going out to multiple sites in a day, they need to practice, biosecurity every farm, just like the veterinarian does when they show up at a dairy farm. They do their boot scrubbing and everything else, and before they go to the next farm. So it's a challenge, but we need to keep doing it. And with that, I will stop. Have fun, Dan.
Yeah, when we head to the field next week and May 1st, we'll be practicing biosecurity in the
Very
field.
good.
All right, thanks. All right, well, next, thank you, Pete. Next on the agenda to take us home for this afternoon is Dan Ludwig, again, our state resource conservationist, and Tony Anastasi, our NRCS state business tool specialist, talking about resource information to consider. All right, thanks, Dan and Tony.
You bet. So we're last on the agenda. I see we're running behind, so I will make some good strides to, I can't promise that I'll make up all the time, but definitely want to go over some things here that we need to consider. I'll start here with a quick poll. So doing a pretest. So question is, what is planning criteria? Is it a way to measure if a resource concern is met or treated, or are they the standards used to dictate planning procedure? We got some responses coming in.
Dan, do you want to repeat that one more time for the folks that can't see the poll?
Sure. What is planning criteria? Is it a way to measure if a resource concern is met or treated, or are they the standards used to dictate the planning procedure? Okay, it looks like our
I know there's some more conservation district folks out there.
Well, in the sake of time, because we've been on here for pretty long time. Let me peek at the chat real quick because my other chat's going on.
There's another poll. Did you launch that, or did I launch that accidentally?
It said Paul Schaefer launched it, so I don't know if that
Paul
was
Schaefer
Paul.
launched it. Okay.
All right, so we got some B's. Let me go back to here, and actually, I lost my presentation. Actually, the correct answer is the first one. Planning criteria is used to determine whether or not a resource concern is met or I can't say I forget my language, but anyway. All right, let's get this presentation going again. Okay, so let's get started here. So a lot of you that have been to Intro to Planning back in the fall, we talked about the 9 steps of planning. And this is the foundation of planning. So because most people have been to Intro to Planning, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Oh, lost my presentation again. What is going on here? Okay, let's see if it sticks this time. So essentially, the 9 steps of planning, it's a standardized thing that's found in the Planning Procedures Handbook. Basically tells us those 9 steps that we would go through from the first time we're at the farm to the plan actually gets implemented by the producer. And kind of what we're going to talk about in this presentation is going to focus on those first 3 steps. So first thing is we have to identify what's the problem. So on here, I know what's the problem? Just need one answer. Erosion, absolutely. Now I could go and say, well, what kind of erosion do we have? Definitely probably some sheet and rill erosion going on, ephemeral gully. Okay, let's look closely at this picture. What is the problem? I got to vote for compaction. Very good. So if you look at the root of this soybean plant, you can see that it makes a sharp 90-degree bend, meaning that it has hit some sort of compacted layer, and is going to impact overall productivity of that plant and its ability to reach its full production potential. How about here? Classic gully erosion, absolutely. And that gets created by a couple different ways. A lot of times we may see it from a discharge from a pipe, or we may see that upslope the water has finally gained enough speed and is concentrated enough to actually cut that gully. Okay, so when we're going out to the field, we're looking at identifying what's the problem. We want to talk to the producer about what their perceived problems are, and also what we see through our visual observations. So, and one thing that we want to look at too when we're defining the problem, we ask ourselves these 4 questions. Is it definable? Is it defensible? Do we have consistency on this? And what's the overall consensus? So definable, meaning it has a definition. If you are familiar with our practice standards, all of our practice standards have a definition, and it tells about what that practice can do to treat a resource concern. Defensible, is it science-based? So what you'll see when you look at our practice standards, we do have references, and we are a science-based technical organization, so we determine that, or we rely on that to provide the evidence that our plans and our plan practices are known to treat those resource concerns. Consistency nationwide. So what you'll find is our practice standards are developed nationally, and then each state has the opportunity to adopt those practices and then make changes to tailor them to what's required in the state. And consensus, peer reviewed. So again, even in Pennsylvania, when we have practice standards and we make revisions to them, usually that's done by formation of a team to look at those by our discipline leads, and then they're sent to the state technical committee for peer review and to gain comments and to make sure that our practice standards are applicable to and can be implemented. One thing is we don't want to write practice standards so specific and so limiting that they cannot be implemented. So again, we want that peer review so we know that what we're planning and what we're recommending to the farmer can actually be implemented. So let's talk a little bit about resource concerns and planning criteria. If you're not familiar with this, NRCS has a national list, which I've done some screenshots of. This is found in section 3 of the Field Office Tech Guide. And essentially what this list is it defines all of the resource concerns that you'll find on the CPA 52. Give you that description of it, our objectives, and then it's going to tell you what tools can be used or visual observation, and then it's going to tell you if what it takes to meet that planning criteria. So as an example for our sheet and reel, it's talking about, it defines it. So we've got the detachment and transport of soil particles. And then some of these practices, it's broken down based on the land use. So we see in cropland, the tools that we can use to determine sheet and reel erosion they have it listed as current NRCS water erosion technology, otherwise known as Russell 2. Okay, and basically to meet planning criteria, our Russell should be less than or equal to T. So it's defining if we run our Russell equation and it's less than T, then we can say that we're meeting that planning criteria. However, visual observation it will trump any of our assessment tools that are out there. So, if you go out to a farm, you've run Russell 2 in the beginning, it all checks out fine, but then you see evidence of that sheet and reel erosion, just because you have a positive, or your Russell meets, your visual observation is going to trump that because you've actually seen it out there. So other thing I want to point out is in pasture, we now use the pasture condition scoring as our method to determine if we have a lot of these resource concerns, and there's 10 indicators on that pasture condition score sheet, and depending on what the specific resource concern is, you'll see that it'll identify which indicators and the score. So here in sheet and reel erosion, you'll see that if you have a PCS score on soil erosion, desirable plants, and plant cover elements, if one or more of those is less than or equal to 4, or it should be less than 4, then that's an indication that you have a resource concern. Okay, so basically we covered this, so we can. So again, do I really need based on these two pictures, do I really need an assessment tool to tell me that I have erosion? I may have an erosion problem going on. No, I have those visual observations, but when we run our assessment tools, that should back up and support our visual observation. Okay, ephemeral gullies. So a lot of times we have a hard time defining what an ephemeral gully is. A lot of the times that it's easily defined is it that minor erosion that can be fixed by using tillage equipment. So again, it's when we're trying to treat that, obviously there's no evaluation tool. It's all based on visual observation, and basically to meet planning criteria, we need to plan a system that so once it's implemented, it's managed to stop progression and no evidence that they redevelop. So I'm thinking of those ephemeral gullies. If they disc them shut every year and they come back, and all we've planned is a single practice, say 345 residue management, have we treated the resource concern? No, because it keeps coming back. year after year or so. So again, thinking about Denise's opening comments about systems approach, and that's what I'm really going to tie into this presentation is, the systems approach again, because we don't have an evaluation tool for every resource concern. We need to evaluate that, and we need to look at, implementing a system so that these resource concerns do not come back after they're treated. Okay, classic gully erosion. We've got that definition, we've seen the picture of it, and essentially to meet that resource concern, it's being managed so the site becomes stable and that active erosion is halted. I was going to come up with a better word, but anyway. So again, typically classic gullies, we may solve that with grass waterways and some diversions, but again, typically to treat that classic gully, we're implementing a system of practices that allows us to treat that resource concern from coming back or persisting. So again, here, like I said, typical scenario is we're going to do a grass waterway to slow down the flow, spread this flow of water out, and we may need to direct, depending on the site, we may need to cut the watershed off, do multiple different things in order to treat that. Talk about bank erosion. Again, that's either from flooding events, animal traffic in pastures. Again, our evaluation tools that we have out there, especially on pastures, land use, a lot of times it's visual observation. We do have an evaluation tool for streams. It's called SVAP2, or Stream Visual Assessment Protocol 2. Not something that we've implemented in Pennsylvania yet, but we're looking at it. If anybody's ever seen SVAP2, it is a very complex assessment that has at least 15 indicators that you need to move through to come up with these different ratings. But again, visual observation, but is typically what we're using, but we do have an assessment tool for it. So again, looking at this pasture situation, we can easily say and see that we've got bank erosion. Really got to look at what is that caused by? What effects are happening that are causing this? So we're seeing some overgrazed pasture with continual access, keeping those banks. That animal traffic is not providing stability. It's actually softening them up for those larger flows. Again, we have an incised bank. So again, once we get flooding events, we can see more cutting and sloughing of those stream banks. Soil compaction. Again, we typically see that. Hopefully we'll get across to everybody next week. And as you keep going, the best tool to have in your vehicle is a spade or a sharpshooter. Quick dig a quick hole, look for platy soil, but we also have the other tools like a penetrometer that we can use and look for those compacted layers. And typically if you haven't used a penetrometer before, we're looking at a PSI rating. Once you hit you'll press that probe down in and you'll be reading that gauge and seeing if you hit these certain levels, then you can record that we have soil compaction. We have some other assessment tools like the infield soil health assessment, and and seeing our roots. So obviously we have some sort of compacted layer, and then we'd be looking at the different practices we can use to break up that compacted layer. Excess water, ponding, flooding, do we see that? What is the cause of that? A lot of times we talk about, we'll look at our soils report and see that soils will say occasionally ponded or flooded, and that's describing the natural condition. But when we're looking at the resource concerns, is what is the effect of that ponding, flooding, or it has seasonal high water table seeps? What is the effect of that? So again, what does the producer need to do to prevent those conditions from causing a resource concern. Hey, water quality degradation, excess nutrients in surface and groundwater. So again, we've got an issue with nutrients, whether from animal concentration areas, inadequate manure storage. So again, looking at what can we do, what systems can we implement to treat that. So again, if we're seeing excess nutrients in surface water, we're having some sort of runoff. And is that not proper timing of nutrient application? Is it over application where those nutrients are leaching into the soil and then moving horizontally to our streams? And obviously, in pastures, we can use PCS. So quick look at this pasture. We've got some surface water down below the cows. We can look at the condition of this pasture. If we've got high stocking densities on small pasture acres, typically there's an over application of manure by those animals. And then combining that with inadequate forage management, meaning we're not growing enough grass to take up the nutrients, then we can deduce that we could have nutrients moving off into the into surface water. And we need to look at our options and what systems we can use to treat that, whether it's installing a buffer below that pasture, or is it managing the grazing, or is it both? So again, thinking about that systems approach, it takes usually one practice alone is not going to fully treat a resource concern in general or from recurring in multiple years. Again, going back to this pasture here, obviously here, the stream is basically down here at the bottom of this bank. Obviously, there's not enough vegetation. We also have, there's not enough vegetation to take up the nutrients. So we're going to see soluble nutrients leaving through runoff. And also because there's not a lot of grass cover out here, we're probably having some sheet and rill erosion. So now we've got phosphorus that's attached to the soil particles and making their way to the stream as well. Okay, again, if we're looking at our headquarters, we may have connectivity from gullies or different concentrated flow areas. So we need to look at, what's behind this picture and where's the water source. What systems do we need to implement to make sure nutrients aren't leaving that site? Okay, plant productivity and health. This is one that we're looking at overall. How is the crop performing? So is it due to improper fertility, or are we trying to grow something that's not adapted to the site? And the way we define whether or not we have this resource concern is our crop yield is at least 75% of that realistic yield. So again, you can use your soils data, you can use producer records. A lot of times producers will manage for a desired yield, but are the soils capable of doing that? And what can we do? What systems can we use in order to increase plant productivity and health? Again, what can we do here to improve plant productivity and health? Obviously, we need to grow more grass, more forages. We may have to restrict access to these pastures in order for that to happen. So we, a lot of times we would look at these, and our single practice we may recommend is a pasture and hayland planting. Well, we have to think about the overall system. We can plan this. We can plan a 512 and try to get more grass growing out here. But if we don't manage the grazing through 528, how are those newly planted forages going to establish and actually do the job of what they're meant to do? So again, can't stress enough, we're looking at this systems approach. So as comparison on a well-managed grazing system, we've got well-managed forage here, lush vegetation, it's growing, it's taking up nutrients. On the other side is after grazing, we're still leaving enough residue, one, that's going to protect the soil from erosion, but yet there's still leaf material left. So the plant's still going to grow and take up nutrients a lot quicker than something that's completely overgrazed. Terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrates. Okay, this may not be a big concern for that producer, but again, we do have clients that are interested in it. And typically, what we're using is our wildlife evaluation guide. So we have some of those developed for every land use, and essentially, depending on your score, if your overall score is 0.5 or greater, that's an indication that that resource concern is being met. Anything less than that shows that there's still a resource concern related to habitat out there, and that sheet is nice because you can look at it and say, all right, well, if I improve this will improve my score, and I can meet that resource concern. Okay, aquatic habitat for fish and others. Again, typically we're looking at using SVAP2. Again, the biggest thing is when we identify this resource concern, what is out there that's telling us that we don't have proper habitat for fish and other organisms? Do we have nutrients going in? Are the banks just stream banks in size, so we're getting sedimentation? Is there no structure in the stream bed? So again, this is what SVAP2 will allow you to evaluate and then plan a practice or a suite of practices to address that resource concern. So again, looking at this system, obviously, we can't see in the stream itself, but we know that upslope from the stream, we definitely have impacts to aquatic habitat, whether it's through nutrients entering the stream. Going back to the other famous picture, the hillside with the beef cattle, sedimentation is adding effect to that. Let's talk a little bit about inventorying our resources when we go out to the farm. Here we're going to do this on, I stole this presentation from Pete Vanderstappen. Pete does such great PowerPoints and presentations that we just got to keep using them. So when we're inventorying our resources, let's look at the first 3 steps in the process, and we'll use our ag waste system as our model. So our first 3 steps, again, are identifying that problem, determining the objectives, and inventorying those resources. And the biggest thing that we need to point out is this is all done as a team approach that's going to take input from the decision maker themselves. They have to decide what they're capable of doing, what kind of resources they have to make changes. You as the planner, what are the best practices and management options that are going to need to be taken for that system to be successful. And also we're going to rely on our engineers to help to design these complex practices. So primary question is, why were we asked or requested to visit that site or that operation? What problems are they seeing? Again, we need to determine what that producer's objective is, or the decision maker. And then we need to develop and collect enough beneficial and sufficient data that we can develop our alternatives that allows us to determine whether or not these suite of practices or this system is going to treat the resource concern. So sources of information. So thinking about, look at the current conservation plan, if it's current. Do they have practices that they have yet to implement? Or is this a whole new resource concern that they need to treat? Do they have a nutrient management plan? We can find a lot of good information if it's been evaluated by a planner. Previous site visits. we can look in our files. If somebody has been out there in the past, the farmer's been on the fence about making a decision, our Con 6 notes will may give us some information that we can use to help develop those alternatives, especially if it's a conservation plan they have not implemented yet. Talk to others that are familiar with the site. Usually a colleague might have been out on that site and has seen it. They can give you some good information to help you determine some of these alternatives. Topo map. Can't stress enough, we need to know the topography of the site, which is going to allow us to know where it's feasible or can be feasible to do our practices. And the biggest one is aerial photos. I can't stress enough the importance of looking at aerial photos, especially multiple years. That'll allow you to see the history of what's going on, what kind of management that producer has used over the years, and what some of the limitations might be. So Google Earth Pro is your friend. Again, you can use that history button and scroll back through multiple years, and you can really look at what's been going on that in that field for a number of years. Again, check the files, especially in our NRCS offices. Typically, we're pack rats. We hold on to information. So I've been able to, on some of the projects I've worked on, I've been able to find good information basically just by going and checking the files to see what we have on record. We have various handbooks and sources of information out there. So again, we're talking about our ag waste system here. So we do have the ag waste field book, section 1 of the technical guide. So we used to have a website, but now we're being forced to put all our technical information that was on the website into section 1. And I know Tim and Paul will be working on that. Obviously, section 4 of the tech guide, where we have all our practices and supporting information. So again, use all of this information. If this is an operation that's new to you, that you haven't been to before, or it's a whole new operation you're totally unfamiliar with. Another thing is, don't be afraid to call someone that knows the site. Again, there may be somebody that's been out there before, a CET or an engineer that may have been out there. Pick up the phone, give them a call, see what kind of information they can give you, and that goes a long way in being able to come up with a plan for that producer. Mentioned the aerial photos. Again, looking at, we can see how things have been managed throughout the years and allow us to get a good indication on what the producer's management is, and it allows us to form some ideas of what alternatives we may propose to them during our visits. Biggest thing is identify the decision maker. Most of our operations are family farms. We need to identify who the actual decision maker is. Is it the father? Is it the son? Because ultimately they're the ones that are going to make the decision and sign the plan. So we need to work with the decision maker so we can get that conservation plan signed, because a conservation plan is actually the record of decisions that the producer has made and what practices are going to implement on the farm. A lot of times we think of a conservation plan as a to-do list. Yeah, it's a plan, I'll think about it. But no, actually our conservation plans is based on what the producer has decided to do. They've made a firm decision, and that's what they're going to implement. Walk the entire site, learn their objectives. Okay, some folks think that a field visit shouldn't take more than an hour. I will be the first one to tell you, take as much time as you need. Walk that entire operation so you can see what's going on, what resource concerns, what potential resource concerns are out there. If we just take the guided tour around the farmstead and look across the landscape, there's a lot of things that we're going to miss. Sometimes the producer doesn't remember all of the resource concerns that they have or issues they need to address. So we need to take the time, walk that entire site. Again, that's going to allow us to look at what systems we need to do to properly and fully address those resource concerns. Biggest thing is document your findings. Write it down. We have our Con 6 notes. Take photos. Obviously, we always like to point out before you start taking photos, make sure the producer is okay with you taking those photos. Okay. For those of you that are techie, if you don't like writing down, we all carry cell phones, and you can dictate right into OneNote, you can dictate into Word. So if you don't like taking notes, handwritten notes, once you get done with your site visit, sit down in your vehicle, talk into your phone, and let it record the notes for you. We also have a lot of different worksheets and INE worksheets that you can use. This one gets used a lot on our farmsteads. Basically, it's a guide for you to guide you through that operation, and looking at what resource concerns are out there allows you to start developing some of your alternatives that you want to present to your producer or your decision maker. Also understand the different types of operations out there. There is no one system that fits every type of operation. So again, what you may plan for a dairy operation may not work for sheep and goats. But what's may be used on a dairy operation certainly probably isn't going to work for an equine operation. So again, knowing the type of operation that you're going to is going to allow you to formulate some alternatives that are more likely going to be implemented by that producer. Again, the size of the operation. Are we dealing with a small scale backyard operation, or somebody that farms part-time, or are we going to a large operation where farming is their full-time job? Obviously, conservation practices are not limited by the size of operation, but the integrity of those practices will have to be planned based on the size of the operation you're working with. Looking at your site location. Okay, how far near to the road is it? It's going to have some implications, especially with siting practices or perception by the public. Are we in an urban or a rural setting? Do we have urban sprawl happening next to the farm? I think we're seeing that a lot. And some of the practices that we're doing, we have to take into account those adjacent land uses. We're also looking at future growth in the area. So again, what's the intent of the producer or the decision maker? Are they set in their size, or do we need to account for expansion in the future? And again, when we start looking at our practices, especially our ag waste practices, are there local township ordinances or regulations that have setbacks on how close certain practices can go to roads or property lines? Again, looking at your topography, obviously, if you're on steep sites, it's going to require different planning considerations versus your flat sites. So again, looking at those topo maps, getting a good understanding of the landscape of the farm prior to going out there, and then using your site visit to confirm that and allow you to develop those solid alternatives. Well, it seems how Yuri's leading the group today, leading the charge. I guess we got to talk about soils. She did make that comment about soils as the foundation that's everything's based on. That was a pretty bold statement, Yuri, but yeah, we do have to look at our soils, because obviously all the soils have limitations. So Yuri mentioned hydric soils. Do we want to be trying to put structural practices within a hydric soil? Will it support that practice? Obviously, looking at depth of bedrock. If we need to put in a 10-foot waste storage tank, and bedrock's at 3 feet, is that a proper location for that? Or are we going to have to do a lot of blasting or jackhammering to actually install that practice? Also looking at your soils for your agronomic practices, especially our pasture. Are they capable of producing the yields that you need to solve and meet some of your resource concerns? knowing your geology. Basically, what are those parent materials in soils? How did they develop over time? So, right here in my office, I have a big Higby map. Great tool to have. I was going to say we used to have a whole bunch of them, but again, Yuri gave them all out, so I don't have any. If anybody was interested in one, sorry, I can't. I don't have any left to give you. But again, these come in because if you're new to the office or the area that you're working in, just by consulting this map, it's going to give you a good indication of some of the restrictions you may run into, or what the overall capabilities are for the practices that you're planning. Okay, Yuri's saying our state geology maps are available from DCNR. So there we go. You can find them online. Seems how we don't have any copies to give you. Okay, talking about climate. Denise mentioned climate, but again, when we're talking about our waste storage systems, it affects the length of storage. How much rainfall do we get? How much freeboard do we need on those tanks to account for that rainfall, especially depending on how much, how long they need to store manure in their crop rotation. Also, manure handling options. Okay, if there's a lot of rain and they have an open lot, we're going to have more slurry manure than solid. And again, we have climate is greatly changes here, even in Pennsylvania, especially with yearly rainfall totals. I think Pike County is highest rated with 50 inches per year. And then we have, somebody might be able to tell me, there's another county out in the west that the overall rainfall is only 30 inches. So yes, our state average is 40 to 43 inches. But again, knowing where you're at and the climate is going to allow you to make good decisions on how you're going to plan and what practices. Okay. Again, our crops, especially when we're designing these ag waste systems, we got to look at what the cropping rotation is, so we know when can the farmer actually apply those nutrients. And that may already be developed in the nutrient management plan. So if the farmer already has one, again, going back to the previous slides, some of the resources that you can check out in the beginning before you make that site visit. And again, it could show you the need for developing other alternatives than that preconceived idea. So, looking at our pasture, we did our TSP meeting last week, and one comment that I always make is pasture is the hardest land use to plan, because it requires that operator or that landowner to make some tough decisions. Usually pasture doesn't have much value to them, other than how much manure they have to collect and scrape. So those pastures become land use. However, because we need to manage them for grass, we have to account for how much access the animals can have, and make sure we have our manure storage and our manure handling systems designed for that. Okay, and the biggest thing is, that interface. We call this the interface between the headquarters and the access to pasture. How are the animals going to get out there? What practices are needed? Labor availability. Is it the owner and just his family? Do they hire help? Do they have seasonal help? Can we look at our practices to reduce labor? How can we make this system work for them? Looking at what kind of transfer equipment's out there. Again, determining what they have, what the status of it is, and do they have the resources available for those future purchases? Or, a lot of times if they're doing a daily haul and looking to move to a liquid storage, are they going to need to use a custom hauler to empty their storages and get that manure out on the crops? Again, what kind of options are out there for unloading an application? Are they pumping it out? Is it going through a traveling gun? Is it going through, again, looking at how are they, once we get these practices installed, how are they going to get that manure out? How are they going to apply it to the land? Big one here is level of management. Okay, looking at your producers, you're going to find that some of them are on the ball. They're big into tech. Others, they've been farming all their lives, low level. So again, one of the things that you can look at is the condition of the buildings. Are they kept up versus are they maintained? Looking at how they store their equipment. Is it stored outside or do they have it in a nice building? Why this comes into play is, if you're going to one of these limited, we'll call them our limited resources types of producers, the systems that we design and what we plan, we got to make them more fail safe. So those lower level managers can still properly implement the practices. Again, looking at our animal housing methods, are they confined, a freestall barn, stanchion barn, bedded pack? Again, that's going to determine what kind of systems we're going to propose to that producer. Again, our travel routes around the farmstead, on our dairies, when we're planning new practices, milk truck still needs to get into the bulk tank, so we can't block that access. When they're filling their silo, making sure that they still have access to do that. When it comes to their manure storage, how do they get to that storage? How do they get out of the farmstead into the fields? And obviously, when they feed the animals, how can they get to that? And how are we going to move livestock to pastures and around that operation? So talked earlier a lot about laws and regulations, but things we have to consider is, depending on where you're at, where the farm's located, does the township require a land development plan? As Frank talked about, are they a CAO or a CAFO? Are they required to have that odor management plan? And are there other zoning ordinances out there that they have to follow? Again, are they a regulated farm that falls under CAO, or are they going to participate voluntarily? And again, looking at their nutrient management plan, looking at overall manure applications, soil nutrient values. Are they limited on how they can actually apply that? Are they limited to P-base, or can they still apply their nutrients on a nitrogen-based rate? And again, what is their need for that conservation plan? And again, once we get into some of our bigger farms and CAFOs, do they need that NPDES permit and all that additional work? And do they need to hire a consultant to do that work? Again, talked a little bit about our setbacks. Utilities are a big one. Obviously we got to look at power lines, different gas lines. That's going to impact where we plan our practices and how we can implement those practices. And then again, looking at our water quality issues. So again, a lot of the standards on our animal waste handling practices, we're preventing discharge of the 25-year, 24-hour storm. We need to hold a certain amount of water back before it leaves. And again, our ultimate goal is to protect our streams, our ponds, lakes, wells, springs. This is a big one, especially if we're dealing with pastures and needing to cross streams, implement stream crossings or underground outlets into streams. If that farm is located on an EV or an HQ watershed, that's going to require additional features, additional planning. Some of our landscape resources that we got to think about is neighbors. We know that common sight, especially when it comes to our animal waste systems. They smell with their eyes. So what do they see and how is that going to affect how we plan things? looking at the prevailing wind. How should we orient these practices? Where should we place them for that prevailing wind, and how those odors and dust leaves that property and goes to the neighboring site. Existing tree lines. Again, we're also looking at our expansion and flexibility. Planning for that. So we got to consider our future animal numbers, especially if they're looking at expanding. When we're planning our structures, do they need to? Oh, guess I got tired of my presentation. All right, I was almost done anyway. So again, putting it all together, it's biggest thing is following the steps of planning. It's going to allow you to really identify the potential resource concerns, collect the data that you need to formulate your alternatives, and again, what we identify out there may not match the objectives and the concerns of the decision maker, but again, it's kind of that balance. We have to look at what needs to be done to meet our objectives as well as the landowner's objectives. And again, as you go to boot camp 2 and attend more trainings, all of that's going to be addressed, in steps 4 through 9. So really want to, I can't stress enough about the systems approach. And the biggest thing to think about is, if we're implementing a systems approach, will that allow us to meet the whole ACT, the avoid control trap? And the answer to that is yes. If we're using that systems approach, planning, looking at that landscape planning systems, it makes it much more achievable to hit all 3 of the ACT versus when we do a single practice to try to address a resource concern. So with that, I know I'm going to turn some time over to Tony Anastasi. Sorry, Tony, I just butchered your name, but
Close enough.
There we go. So he's got a few slides to show that how we can really look at how this whole systems approach and ACT methodology can be applied in the field. So I'm turning it over to you, Tony.
Okay. So yeah, I'm Tony Anastasi. That's how you say it. I'm the business tool specialist in Pennsylvania. I just have a really quick little bit here to talk about. This is really about CEAP, which is the Conservation Effects and Assessment Project, I believe, which is a big multi-agency project to try to come up with ways to identify areas that are in need of treatment and kind of track our progress with that. And there's 2 layers that they publish, which we can make available to the public. Now, a lot of their data we cannot really share because it's based on practices we've done. And by looking at the data, you can see, who specifically has done practices with us. That's not information that we can just give out. But 2 of the layers that I'm going to talk about today, one of them is SVI, or the Soil Vulnerability Index, which is basically just looking at the soil maps, the soil data that we have from the soil surveys, and all the properties that are in there. And they have kind of come up with a calculation to kind of guess, I guess, which soils are going to be the most susceptible to specifically surface loss of sediment, nutrient, pesticides, and also subsurface loss, so leaching. And so that's really what these maps are focused on. It's cropland only, and really focusing on those resource concerns. So I'm going to share my screen and pull up the first one. Could somebody let me know if you can see this map here?
See it?
Okay, perfect. All right, so this is the soil vulnerability index. Like I said, it's coming from the soil survey, and we have it for the whole state here. These white areas are areas that are not cropland. So that's, like I said, this is really just meant to be used on cropland. So they've clipped out every other land use so that, you know, where we're only using it where it makes sense. These red areas are the most vulnerable areas. These are the areas that potentially we would want to treat first. And I can zoom way in on this. It's probably pretty laggy because this is a huge map. But it really is at a level where you can kind of, let me see here. You can see individual fields if you zoom in far enough on this thing. It's done at a pretty fine scale. We also have separate maps for, that one was the surface. We also have a separate map for subsurface loss. You can really see big differences between the two, where surface is much more of a problem in Pennsylvania than subsurface loss. But there is still some areas that, are red on here. And then there's also separate for subsurface undrained. They look, the subsurface and the subsurface undrained look pretty similar. There's just a few differences, but this would be for use on land that has not been drained. They're not split out because they didn't really have that data, so you just kind of have to know with the fields you're looking at which one you'd want to use for that. So anyways, the SVI is kind of the basis for this next map I'm going to show. Basically what they did was they took the SVI and they took all of our data of practices that we have applied that are in NPAD. So any practice the NRCS has applied since the early 2000s, I want to say, when we started doing everything digitally, is in what we call NPAD, National Planning, something with an A database. And all of that practice data is in there, and they kind of calculated based on those resource concerns, based on what they know of those practices, how much of an effect that would have had. And that allows us to kind of see where we've already treated areas. So this is also done on a field scale, but that's the part I cannot share publicly. NRCS employees, you have access to this. These layers are in Conservation Desktop, or I can get them to you, and they are actually on a field by field level. But here we had to kind of generalize it or aggregate it to a watershed level in order to protect the privacy of our producers. So this is really rough, but it's split it into 4 categories. And really on this map, you're seeing 2 things. You're seeing the high and low remaining, and so that's really like the amount of area that was the red and orange colors on the last map that have not been treated with AC&T practices by us, versus low remaining, which are areas where either there's not much work to do. Like a lot of these gray areas, it's not necessarily that that they're perfect, just that a lot of them don't have much cropland. And so there was not a lot of crop acres that we would want to treat with these practices, which is all this map is meant for. And you're also seeing the high and low treated here. So high treated, low remaining, that's the green color. These are areas where we've really done a lot of work and there's not as much left to do. These would be kind of the lower priority areas to work on. Low treated, low remaining, like I said, there was maybe never much to do in the first place. And then the low treated, high remaining, this darker red color would be the areas that are in the most need of action. So these are areas with very vulnerable soils where there's a lot of fields that have not gotten their AC&T, void control and trap practices implemented on them. And again, this is separate for surface subsurface, which you see there's a lot less on here, and then the subsurface undrained. So really the intention here is workload prioritization. For at least for these maps, if you are in the NRCS and you have access to that field level data I was talking about, I did talk about that a couple weeks ago, that I can get the link to you if you want, or I can work with anyone to look at those layers if they want to, who has access to them. That's like I said, is at a field level where you could actually look at one producer's land and see which individual fields they have that have gotten the A, the C, and the T practices on, to see which ones would potentially be most useful to work on. And that's one thing, is to really keep in mind the limitation of this data. It is just soil data and practice data. That's it. And so it doesn't tell anywhere close to the whole story. This is really a starting point. This would be something to look further into, but yeah, obviously you need to be out there on the ground to really know if that site has been treated or not. Just because we did practices on that site 10 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that it's done and good to go. So yeah, these are available. I don't exactly know where we could put them to get them on a publicly available website, but I can post these in chat. I can send them to anybody who asks for them. That's really all I want to talk about. Does anybody have any questions about these maps? Yes. Yeah. I'll post these in chat right now. These SVI ones are kind of monsters. I think they're like 50 megabytes each. But I think it'll let me post that in chat here.
So you're posting the GIS layer?
No, just these maps. So the
Okay.
GIS layers, I can put those on people's F drives if they really want to, but if you have access to Conservation Desktop, all of this data
Yeah.
is already on there. It's in the, you go to your map preferences and there's a conservation tab in there, and all the SVI, CCBI data is already in there, and that's probably the easiest way to look at it. But if you do not have access to Conservation Desktop, I can definitely work with you to get this data. But
Yeah.
not seeing any other questions, so that's really all I got.
Okay, thanks, Tony. So again, yeah, those SVI maps are, we see them as a nice tool because again, when we start talking about the systems approach in ACT methodology, that's, we can't stress enough through our conservation planning efforts where, we have to, really look at the entire field, the entire landscape, and trying to find the systems of practices that are going to allow us to treat a resource concern and prevent it from happening in the future. So I do have one last poll. So if conservation planners use a systems approach to treating resource concerns, what principle will be achieved? Will that result in a pay raise or a promotion? Will it result in implementation of an RMS level conservation plan? Or is it going to result in being able to develop a conservation plan that achieves the ACT methodology? All right, at least one person thinks it'll get them a pay raise. All right.
Can you read it one more time, Dan? I'm not getting all the, I think my system just slowed down to a crawl.
Sure. If conservation planners use a systems approach to treating resource concerns, what principle will be achieved? A pay raise or promotion, implementation of an RMS level plan, or developing a conservation plan that achieves the ACT methodology? So seeing lots of C's, got a couple B's. Looks like one person is on that pay raise or promotion. You guys have nailed it. Yes, absolutely. And yep, like I said, that's the one thing that we as conservation planners, as we're working our way through our career, is right looking at that whole landscape approach. What systems can we do, and ultimately, if we result in using a systems approach, it makes us a lot more able to meet that methodology of ACT. And with that, I think I'll be quiet again because I think everybody's heard enough of me.
Hey, well, you got us right on schedule at 2:30. So, that concludes our first day of our basic boot camp. So we will start up again on Thursday at 8 a.m. And thank you all to the presenters, whoever's still with us. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Tony. I think Pete already hopped off. I don't know if Peter Hoagland is still on, but thanks everybody, and thanks you guys for hanging in there. It was a lot of information, and I do believe these presentations will be available to all of you. So I just got to clear that up with Tim Peters, how we're getting that to you. So we'll see you on Thursday.
We'll post it.
Morning.
I'll
You'll
send
post
the
it.
website out. We'll post it after the second one.
There's
work
Tim.
with I'm back. Yes. So we'll get a website out to everybody where you can download the presentations that you would like to keep for your records, and that website will be provided after the second training. Thanks.
All right. Any other announcements, Tim, before we close up?
No, thank you. Thanks, Yuri. Appreciate the help, and
All right.
thanks everyone for attending. I know it's a full day, but we'll look forward to chatting again on Thursday.
All right. Take care. Bye.